I was a first-year fellow in Houston at Texas Heart. Probably about a month into the fellowship, Paul Gillette came up to me and said, "You doing any projects with anybody?" And I said, "No, I'm a first-year fellow. I don't even know where the bathroom is on the second floor, let alone do any projects." So he said, "Do you want to write a chapter in a textbook that I'm doing?" So I said, "Sure. Yeah. Great, thanks, love it. Always say yes." That's one thing I've always done, always say yes. Pause. "Okay, what's the topic of the textbook?" He looked at me and said, "Cardiac electrophysiology." Awesome, cool. Pause. What is cardiac electrophysiology? Now remember, this is 1978. There is no really pediatric cardiac electrophysiology. Paul's really getting going. Gelband had been doing some stuff. Grace is out doing some things. But it really isn't a big field like it is today. And I realized, well, with this, you can work in the cath lab, which was fun. And it got to be interesting. Paul was a great mentor. There was two parallel forces that were going on at the same time in EP. One of them was the electrophysiology part. So you're evaluating mechanisms of arrhythmias, and we were playing with drug therapy. And then we had a great animal lab. Bob Lewis ran this program there. It was just great. Learned a lot of surgical techniques. And we had models of looking at the effect of drugs on the conduction system, sinus node, AV node. And along this way, this cardiac device management creeps in. So we're at the early days of pacemakers also as applicable to children. So I remember going down to a strip mall in Freeport, Texas, and there was a startup company called Intermedics, which became Guidant, which became now Boston Sci. It was in a strip mall. And I remember just going, there was the massage parlor over here, and there was the ice cream place over here, and then right between the two was the pacemaker company. And going there and chatting with the engineers, and I realized this is kind of an exciting field. So over the next decade, 15 years, you saw the evolution of EP and more mapping, and then we started surgical ablations, and later on catheter ablations. And a lot of it was technical, which was a lot of fun for me. Growing up, making crystal radios in the dark ages of the 50s, right? So then when the pacing started, and we were interested in that, that became a whole separate field that was very, very exciting for me personally. So I think it was the evolution of two things, working knowledge of what was going on and the ability to intervene and do something. Remember, in '78, we were doing EKGs, we had vectors, vector cardiography, remember that? You read about it in the history books, And we had M-mode echo. And that was about it, and everything got started later on at that time. So I think that was the reason I really got into it, that you could actually do things and kind of wing it as you go. And Paul was very good at that. Dan McNamara gave him a lot of free rein to do things that, were questionable today, I guess, when you think about it. But it was very innovative thought processes that were going on. Paul gave me another challenge in my second year, I think it was, of trying to record a His bundle in an awake, non-sedated animal. Because we had an animal model that we could look at verapamil, a new drug just came out. We could look at digoxin, but they were always sedated. So Paul said, well, can you find a place to put an electrode to record a His bundle, but I don't want anything inside the heart, and I don't want any atriotomies or ventriculotomies. So I said, okay, let's see what I can do. So I talked with Bob Lewis. We figured out there actually is a spot between the right atrial appendage and the aorta, and you can actually insert a little plug electrode right down there, record a chronic His bundle, and then that allowed you to record this in the awake animal, just brought it out to the scuff, and they were fine. And we could then measure the intervals. And then as one thing leads to another, if you can record from the His bundle, well then we could actually knock out the His bundle and cause an animal model of heart block. And this again helped a lot in the industry because they were making pacemakers for adults. So we had no model for children. So by making the animal model of congenital heart block, essentially, normal anatomy, by injecting a little formalin into the AV node, and actually I read about it, yeah, you could do this. Surgeons used to put formalin into the ductus to keep it open for cyanotic babies. So we did that, and that created the animal model. And then they said, okay, well now can we pace from there? So talking to the surgeons, they said, well, probably you could, but we're worried about erosion into the aorta. Can you find a place on the inside? So then I worked with industry. We made a helical catheter. We screwed it directly into the bundle right above the tricuspid valve, and that evolved into what we have today. And then you do site pacing, and the effects of pacing on the heart. So it was really an exciting field because you were looking at new technology that was being applicable to babies, and at the same time seeing the effects of that in the long term. And it really was very, for me, very fulfilling, very self-fulfilling as a career. We went to Heart House, and Grace Wolf I think she organized it or Paul organized it, and there was a cadre of people that were interested in this electrophysiology stuff. Even in my fellowship, where John Kugler was a year or so ahead of me, and Garson was a year or so ahead of me, and Peter Hessline, Colburn Porter. So, and then we met people from Boston, and people from Philadelphia, Vicki Vetter, and so the old guard, and Grace, obviously. And what we did is we started at the Heart House, we met them, and she was talking about a society of pediatric EP people, which you could count on, 2 hands basically, I think back then, or even maybe 20 people. And then we had meetings at the heart meeting, which then evolved mostly drug therapy for arrhythmias, tetralogy, that type of thing, and transpositions. And then as the evolution occurred, Medtronic used to have groups come to Minneapolis in the middle of winter to do focus groups. And that's when I think industry started recognizing there's this force out there called pediatric electrophysiologists that are different from the internal medicine people, and they've got different needs and different issues. And we would sit down with the engineers and design stuff. This is where the leadless technology evolved. And they gave us the idea, well, this is feasible, this is not feasible, we can downsize, we can do things like that. So I think what we saw over the 80s was a small group evolving into a bigger group, and then interacting with industry to basically make it what it is today, I think. It's a fun group and very easygoing, and that was one of the nice things about it too, that you met people of similar attitude, and we're always interested in a very diverse field. So some people were more focused on EP, and then John started the registry ablation. It's probably 1990, I think, when we started doing catheter ablations, because prior to that we were in the OR doing ablations with our surgeons. And then you had the pacing part. So it was really a wide variety, I think, which made it very, very exciting for people like myself that were tinkerers our whole life and playing around in the cath lab and things of that nature. PACES is going to continue. It's going to evolve. I have no doubt about it. We're already seeing, just came from a session, and my God, it's 10 times bigger than it was, years ago. There's a lot of associated personnel there. A lot of nursing staff now are involved too, affiliated personnel. And that's important because I think, my nurse, she's excellent. And we're seeing a lot of change in that regard, of more affiliated. But I think the real future is going to be as the adult patients get older and they reach into the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. I'm still taking care of 60-year-olds. We're going to see PACES becoming less of the P and more of the C. It's going to be a congenital heart electrophysiology society. And it's not for the bad, because as you know yourself, if you use the word pediatrics, industry pulls back and everybody goes, oh my God, you're dealing with kids, we're not so sure we want to deal with this. But if you use the word congenital heart, then that involves all ages. So I think as the internal medicine people now are getting boarded in adult congenital, I think those who go into EP will probably get bored with AFib, because that's pretty much all they're doing. And they may want to get more and more into the congenital stuff, which is a lot more fun. It's more challenging. So PACES, I think, will grow. We may end up with a lot more internists, than pediatricians in the next 20, 30 years, as this group of patients is going to demand we have electrical people that know what's going on with them. So we'll see what happens with it, but I think it's going to continue to evolve. I have no doubt about it, and it's going to get more exciting. Yeah, I think this is a very important issue. Number one, what's the job market? And everything goes in peaks and troughs and peaks and troughs, so you have to catch it at the right time. And they have to have an interest, but they have to realize that, and I tell this to my fellows, if you want to go into pediatric cardiology, you're not just going to take care of babies anymore. The baby's going to get diagnosed, they're going to do fine, and then years later they're going to have electrical problems or structural problems, interventional problems. So I think the idea is you have to be forward-thinking. You have to know a little bit about physics. You have to know a little bit about, what you slept through during, biology class. And you have to have really an intuitive mind that you really want to improve everything. And I think the field of arrhythmia management, CRT pacing for heart failure, adult congenital, this is all evolving as we speak. And it's becoming a different field than it was when I started, way back in the dark ages. And I just tell the young fellows that it's changing. You've got to know a lot of basic stuff, but it's a place that you can do a lot of innovation. And I think that's the important part, is that if you're a free thinker and you want to try something, you can probably get away with it in EP. You can go to industry and say, hey, can you guys design this for me? I've been thinking about that, this, the other thing. So it's an ongoing field. It's definitely not a dead field. And it's just going to work out, I think, for everybody.